Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I am flying solo this week, so let's get right to it. The House will come in Tuesday and leave Friday, while the Senate will come back Monday and leave Thursday. Last week in the House came back on Monday after a long August recess that actually began on July 25. The House voted to pass two bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House passed a rule governing floor consideration of 6 bills. Then the House passed a bill under suspension. Then the House took up H.R. 1516, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concern Act, and agreed to it. Then the House passed the bill as amended. On Wednesday, the House took up H.R. 1425, the No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty Without Senate Approval Act. The House considered and agreed to one amendment, then voted to pass the bill. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 1398, the Protect America's Innovation and Economic Security from CCP Act. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 9456, the Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act. On Thursday, the House took up and passed H.R. 7980, the End Chinese Dominance of Electric Vehicles in America Act. And then they were done. And those of you who remember last week's Washington report will be wondering, wait, he told us a week ago that this week Speaker Johnson would be bringing to the floor on Wednesday a continuing resolution packaged with the SAVE Act attached. And you'd be right. That's what I told you last week. But it didn't happen. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. This week in the House will come back Tuesday with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 38 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday and for the balance of the week, the House will consider H.R. 5339, the Protecting Americans' Investments from Woke Policies Act. H.R. 5179, the Anti-BDS Labeling Act. H.R. 7909, the Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. H.R. 3724, the End Woke Higher Education Act. H.R. 4790, the Prioritizing Economic Growth Over Woke Policies Act. H.J. Res. 136, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval against the rules submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency relating to multi-pollutant emission standards for model years 2027 and later light-duty and medium-duty vehicles. And H.R. 5717, the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act. And at the very end of the Majority Leader's calendar, it reads, quote, "An item related to government funding may be considered," end quote. That's a reference to the continuing resolution, about which we will speak more in just a moment. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to end debate on the nomination of Adam B. Abelson to be a U.S. District Judge for the District of Maryland. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nomination of Jeanette A. Vargas to be a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of New York. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nomination of Mary Kay Lanthier to be a U.S. District Judge for the District of Vermont. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Laura Marguerite Provenzino to be a U.S. District Judge for the District of Minnesota. On Thursday, the Senate voted to confirm her to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Kevin Gafford Ritz to be a U.S. Circuit Judge for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will return Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on confirmation of the nomination of Kevin Gafford Ritz to be a U.S. Circuit Judge for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see a vote on the nomination of Mary Kathleen Costello to be a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And I would not be surprised to see the Senate take action on some kind of a continuing resolution. Now, let's talk about the CR plus SAVE Act. That's the continuing resolution that Speaker Johnson did not bring to the floor last week. Why didn't he? Because he didn't have the votes to pass it, and he wanted to give it another week to percolate. Remember, he's got a very small majority. He can only afford to lose 3 votes if all Democrats vote against it. 2 Democrats have said they plan to vote for it. They're Democrats in difficult re-election races, so they're looking for ways to look bipartisan. And their 2 votes mean Speaker Johnson has a margin of precisely 5 to play with. The problem is he had more than 5 Republicans say in advance of the planned Wednesday vote that they were planning to vote against the CR plus SAVE Act. In fact, he had a dozen, and they represented different factions of the House Republican Conference, and they opposed the CR plus SAVE Act for different reasons. Some oppose the combined bill because they're defense hawks, and they think the strains on the Pentagon are difficult enough already without having to deal with the additional difficulties caused by a 6-month continuing resolution. Some opposed it because they think the current Congress should finish up funding the government for FY25, so the new president doesn't have to enter office in January of 2025 and immediately begin a funding fight with the new Congress. Some opposed it because they don't think the SAVE Act should be added to a funding bill. But all opposed it and made clear they would vote against it. So Speaker Johnson pulled the bill from the floor before it ever got there and announced that Majority Whip Tom Emmer would spend the weekend working the vote with a view to holding the vote later this week. I'm still not sure that's going to happen. I cannot imagine Speaker Johnson will put the bill on the floor if he doesn't know ahead of time that he has the votes. And I have a hard time seeing how he gets the votes. If he pulls the bill again, we don't know what's next. He's been insisting for some time that there is no plan B. So we don't know if his fallback position is to put a 6-month CR on the floor without the SAVE Act, or to put a 3-month CR on the floor with the SAVE Act attached, or to put a 3-month CR on the floor without the SAVE Act attached. Whatever it is, members will punt spending to December. That's my guess, because that's the easiest way to get out of town before the election, and they'd prefer to be at home campaigning. That CR that lasts through December, won't include the SAVE Act because President Biden still has the veto pen and he's still against it. Now let's talk about Afghanistan. On Monday of last week, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall released a 354-page report on the calamitous withdrawal of American military forces, government officials, and civilians from Afghanistan in August of 2021. According to the report, security was compromised as a result of U.S. officials' determination to remove all traces of American influence before September 11, 2021, the 20-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks that remade American life and refocused our national security policy into the so-called war on terror. Under pressure from President Biden, who was the key player determined to withdraw U.S. forces before that anniversary, American officials on the ground overrode objections from NATO allies and Biden's own military advisors to hurry the removal of U.S. personnel regardless of the Taliban's failure to abide by terms of the withdrawal agreement or the developing security situation on the ground. Says the report, quote, Mr. Biden has demonstrated distrust of America's military experts and advisors and has prioritized politics and his personal legacy over America's national security interests, end quote. Now let's have the latest on the shooting aftermath. The Washington Post reported on Friday that an internal investigation by the Secret Service into the attempted assassination of former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania 2 months ago, quote, confirmed security breakdowns that paved the way for an attempted assassination of Donald Trump, while also revealing new information, including that agents never directed local police to secure the roof of the building used by the gunman, unquote. But that's old news. On Sunday afternoon in West Palm Beach, as President Trump was playing a round of golf at his golf club, the Secret Service encountered an armed gunman hiding in the bushes surrounding the golf course, apparently waiting for President Trump to come closer before opening fire on him. According to the Palm Beach County Sheriff, the suspect was 300 to 500 yards away from Trump when a sharp-eyed Secret Service agent confronted him. The suspect fled the area, and the Secret Service agent fired on him. The suspect was apprehended shortly thereafter in neighboring Martin County. The suspect had a GoPro camera. I will not speculate what he may have planned to do with that. On his X account, the suspect regularly criticized former President Trump, saying the 2024 election was a referendum on democracy. Stay tuned. Now for the latest from the House Freedom Caucus leadership fight. Virginia Congressman Bob Good, who has served as chairman of the House Freedom Caucus since January of this year, lost his primary election and has stepped down as House Freedom Caucus chairman. Later this week, the Freedom Caucus will select a new chairman, and there's a pretty good chance, right now at least, that the new chairman will be named Andy. What we don't know today is whether it'll be Andy Biggs of Arizona, or Andy Harris of Maryland, or maybe even Andy Ogles of Tennessee. Biggs, a former HFC chairman, would serve as a placeholder chairman until January, when an election for the next HFC chairman will take place. Harris has indicated an interest in serving as more than a placeholder candidate, and if he's selected, he may end up serving longer than a year. And Ogles has expressed interest, but hasn't yet committed to trying for the chairmanship this week. Stay tuned. Now to the latest on the anti-Trump lawfare front. On Thursday in Georgia, Judge Scott McAfee, presiding over Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's prosecution of former President Trump, dismissed 2 more charges against Trump on the grounds that they fall under federal jurisdiction. Quote, because counts 14, 15, and 27 lie beyond this state's jurisdiction and must be quashed, the defendant's motions to dismiss the indictment under the Supremacy Clause are granted in part, McAfee wrote. In March, McAfee dismissed 3 previous charges against Trump on the grounds that they lacked specific detail. In a footnote to the ruling, McAfee noted that the Supreme Court's recent ruling that even a former president enjoys limited immunity from criminal prosecution may affect the remaining charges in the Georgia case. His footnote pointed out that neither Trump's attorneys nor the Fulton County DA's office had made any arguments in the wake of that ruling. Now let's talk about the campaign. First up, election integrity. On Friday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued a critical ruling declaring that mail-in ballots without the correct dates on envelopes cannot be counted in elections. That ruling could prove crucial in November's elections. Next up, the debate. On Tuesday evening of last week, an audience of 67 million tuned in to watch a 90-minute debate pitting former President Trump against Vice President Kamala Harris. Both showed themselves to be what we've known about each of them for years. He was a bull carrying his own china shop, and she was a fake. Both did what they were expected to do. She was polished and on point, and he talked about what he wanted to talk about. What people will remember about this debate is how biased the moderators were. The 2 ABC News moderators, David Muir and Lindsay Davis, clearly planned ahead of time to insert themselves into the debate whenever they thought it necessary to correct something Trump said. Consequently, they ended up doing so-called fact checks in real time, 7 or 8 times when Trump made a point, but never when Harris misspoke. As a result, Harris's declaration that As of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world the first time this century was not fact-checked by anyone other than the members of the armed forces who called her out for the misstatement. The bias was so bad that Mark Penn, who once worked for Bill Clinton, published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling out ABC for its bias. Not surprisingly, Kamala Harris's campaign immediately called for a second debate between the two. Trump rejected the idea. That might or might not be a negotiating ploy by Trump. He's certainly not going to agree to a second debate without having it take place on a network he's more comfortable with than he is with ABC. I said last week I anticipated that Tuesday's debate would be the last debate we see between Trump and Harris, and I still think that. We'll see. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 86 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped last Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's interview with Steve Cortes. Steve, a former Newsmax host, is well known as an excellent political analyst. He and Jenny Beth get into a serious discussion about how, even though former President Trump's policies are on the economy and immigration are favored overwhelmingly by voters, Kamala Harris is keeping the race close because of the bias of the dominant media. Highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. This week is Only Citizens Vote Week, where our national Only Citizens Vote coalition is working to focus attention on efforts to ensure that only citizens vote. Please visit onlycitizensvotecoalition.com and sign up there to participate. Then visit KamalaQuiz.com. That's KamalaQuiz.com to take our 527 Super PAC's new Kamala Quiz, and then share it with your family, friends, co-workers, and anybody else you think might benefit from learning more about Kamala Harris. One more time, that's KamalaQuiz.com. And be sure to sign up at MarchToVictory.com. That's MarchToVictory.com. You and your efforts could make the difference between victory and defeat in the November elections. So go to MarchToVictory.com. That's our 527 Super PAC's volunteer sign-up effort. As always, if you have a question or a comment, you can email us at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question on air, just ask for broadcast. Just add "for broadcast" to the subject line. We'll see you next week. Until then, be well and be active.